White knight marches to f3. Black knight marches to f6. White pawn marches to c4. Black pawn marches to g6. White pawn marches to b3. Black bishop marches to g7. White bishop marches to b2. Black kingside castling. White pawn marches to g3. Black pawn marches to d6. White bishop marches to g2. Black pawn marches to e5. White kingside castling. Black knight marches to d7. White pawn marches to d4. Black rook moves sideways to e8. White pawn captures pawn at e5. Black knight marches to g4. White knight marches to c3. Black pawn captures pawn at e5. White queen marches to c2. Black pawn marches to c6. White rook moves sideways to d1. Black queen marches to e7. White knight marches to e4. Black knight marches to c5. White knight marches to d6. Black rook moves sideways to d8. White bishop marches to a3. Black pawn marches to b6. White bishop captures knight at c5. Black pawn captures bishop at c5. White knight captures bishop at c8. Black rook captures knight at c8. White rook captures rook at d8 and gives check. Black rook captures rook at d8 and breaks check. White knight retreats to d2. Black pawn marches to f5. White bishop captures pawn at c6. Black pawn marches to e4. White bishop retreats to d5 and gives check. Black king escapes check at h8. White pawn marches to e3. Black knight retreats to e5. White king marches to g2. Black knight marches to d3. White rook moves sideways to d1. Black knight marches to b2. White rook moves sideways to b1. Black knight retreats to d3. White knight retreats to f1. Black pawn marches to g5. White rook moves sideways to d1. Black rook moves sideways to f8. White rook captures knight at d3. Black pawn captures rook at d3. White queen captures pawn at d3. Black pawn marches to f4. White knight marches to d2. Black pawn captures pawn at e3. White pawn captures pawn at e3. Black queen marches to f6. White queen retreats to e2. Black queen marches to b2. White bishop retreats to f3. Black queen captures pawn at a2. White knight marches to e4. Black queen captures pawn at b3. White knight captures pawn at c5. Black queen marches to b2. White queen captures queen at b2. Black bishop captures queen at b2. White knight marches to e6. Black rook moves sideways to e8. White bishop marches to d5. Black pawn marches to a5. White pawn marches to c5. Black pawn marches to a4. White pawn marches to c6. Black bishop retreats to e5. White knight captures pawn at g5. Black king marches to g7. White king marches to f3. Black pawn marches to a3. White knight marches to e6 and gives check. Black king escapes check at f6. White knight retreats to c5. Black rook moves sideways to a8. White knight marches to d7 and gives check. Black king escapes check at e7. White knight captures bishop at e5. Black king marches to d6. White pawn marches to c7. Black king captures bishop at d5. White resigns and black wins the game.